School Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Trump demands Zelensky surrender. Sign the peace deal right now or else. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into the content. Europe is upset. Zelensky's upset. Trump is trying to force Zelensky's hand so the U.S. can save face. Putin just taking whatever he wants.
Details of Trump's plan have emerged that are hard to believe. Washington finishes off a drug addict who is mired in theft. So, Zelensky must sign a peace deal by November 27th. Otherwise, next Thursday, Trump will deprive the Kiev regime of weapons and intelligence, that is, everything that supports the Ukrainian government. More important news. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, in a telephone conversation that has reportedly just begun, is explaining the nuances of the Washington plan to Zelensky at these moments. There are a lot of details. Trump is probably going to put pressure on Zelensky personally if Vance fails to cope with the task. According to Sky News, a telephone conversation between the U.S. president and the Ukrainian head of state will take place next week. The Russian army is moving like a skating rink. 16 settlements have been liberated at once this week alone. Among them is the strategic city of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region, which is a giant logistics center. Putin heard a report from the military right on the front line. Breaking news. After discussing Trump's plan with the Vice President of America, this telephone conversation has just ended. Zelensky began to prepare Ukrainians for surrender. Right now, this moment, he is addressing the nation. His first phrase, even metal breaks. Is Zelensky giving up? An eloquent example of a desperate situation. Otherwise, why does he repeat several times like a spell, I'm not alone? And he begs, to quote directly, to stop this mess. The head of the Kiev regime said that even strong metal cannot withstand. What is he hinting at? Why is there such a tantrum all of a sudden? The overdue usurper even recalled his presidential oath, in which he promised to defend the Constitution. This sounds mocking, given the fact that Zelensky has long ignored the Constitution. His term of office expired a year and a half ago, but he continues to cling to power even now in the pouring rain. Zelensky said that now is one of the most difficult periods in the history of Ukraine. Trump's plan, he said, condemns Ukrainians to a life without freedom. Although in fact Ukrainians are living without freedom right now, under Zelensky. The country's borders are closed, and human hunters are rampant in the streets. Listen up.
Citizens of Ukraine. There is a moment in the life of every nation when everyone needs to talk honestly, calmly, without speculation, rumors, gossip, without...
Revolutionary salute to our family, Richard Chavis, for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is with life. Absolutely appreciate the love, soldiers. Salute.
anything superfluous, the way how it is, the way I always try to talk to you. This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. Currently, the pressure on Ukraine is one of the heaviest. Now Ukraine may face a very difficult choice.
Grand Rising, salute. I told y'all this day was coming. I'm the first one to tell y'all we would be here.
Either the loss of dignity, or the risk of losing a key partner. Either a difficult 28 items, or an extremely difficult winter. This is the hardest choice and further risks. An answer will be expected.
I told y'all these people can't defeat no Russia. I told y'all this when it began, and people who've been paying attention know I told y'all that. They can't defeat no Russia. Only in their fucking dreams. They could never defeat no Russia. And bet not really try that with Russia, or it'll be a nuclear war. But Trump is trying to help the U.S. empire save a little face. He don't give a damn about Zelensky in Europe no more. They're finna be humiliated. But what he doing, it's not for him. It's for the empire to save face and pretend like they working with Putin. And guess what? Putin is letting them pretend like they coming up with a deal together when
From
Putin getting
us.
everything he want and more. That's a fact.
We do not make loud statements. We will work calmly with America and all partners. There will be a constructive search for solutions with our main partner. I will bring arguments. I will convince. I will offer alternatives. But it is clear that we will not give the enemy any reason to prove that Ukraine does not want peace, that it is disrupting negotiations, and that Ukraine is not ready for diplomacy. Of course, we are made of steel, but any metal, even the most durable, cannot withstand. Don't forget about it. I am addressing all Ukrainians now, to our people, to the citizens, to the politicians, to everyone. We need to get organized, come to our senses, stop the mess, stop playing politics.
So, as we can see, events are unfolding right at these minutes. Amid growing pressure from Washington, Bloomberg is calling on Zelensky to dismiss the head of the office, Ermak, who is also the head of an organized criminal group. The agency warns that otherwise a parliamentary crisis will occur in Ukraine, but Zelensky is apparently not afraid of this crisis. The Ukrainian usurper talked to the servants of the people. According to People's Deputy Zelensky, Zelensky announced to members of his faction that corruption, alas, is normal, it happens everywhere. The scandal surrounding Mintich's audio recordings is allegedly being fanned by Americans and Russians. And Zelensky's team is already investigating who is leaking false information to the Americans. Well, that is, the usurper is preparing to persecute dissidents again. Like Hitler in the last days of the Great Patriotic War, Zelensky's paranoia is progressing. The meeting with the people's deputies was held in the strictest secrecy. All phones were forcibly taken away from the people's deputies at the entrance. Deputy Krivosheyev refused to hand over his smartphone, and he was not allowed to attend the event. Ermak himself, Alibaba, or Alla Borisovna, is still the right-hand man of the Ukrainian president. The leader of the Kiev regime sent Bazuglia, the people's deputy, away after she hinted at his dismissal, as reported by People's Deputy Goncharenko. Instead of repentance, Zelensky's gang, clinging to power, decided to accuse everyone who talks about their theft of pushing Ukraine to surrender. Such a trivial scheme. Incredible news is coming from Ukraine right now. The chief of the General Staff of Ukraine, General Natov, attended the meeting with Trump's envoy. Trump sent a military man to Ukraine. Here are these footages. This is U.S. Army Secretary Driscoll. So, Natov was present at these negotiations. He just stated that the year 2025 has exhausted the Ukrainian army to the limit. According to him, this year has made the situation of the Ukrainian army very difficult. This year has exhausted the Ukrainian army. And at the same time, an urgent statement. Right now, events are actually unfolding in real time. Breaking news is coming from Washington. Trump makes a statement. He holds a press conference. He just made a statement. I'll test it. Ukraine is losing its territories. And I myself am striving to put an end to this war. Trump said Thursday was a suitable deadline for the Ukraine plan. This is an important statement. U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed the information that his plan exists, and this plan has a deadline of Thursday, November 27th, which is Thanksgiving Day in the United States. Donald Trump is demanding that Zelensky sign his 28-item plan before Thanksgiving. By this moment, Trump himself had not commented on the information that he would cancel American aid. But such a drain has been published today by 3 American publications at once, including the rather respected Washington Post. And for the first time, President Putin commented on the Ukrainian corruption scandal. Zelensky and his accomplices are not a political leadership, but a real organized criminal group. The president said that Zelensky and his gang had usurped power, explaining that they needed to fight the Russians. But in the end, they simply plundered the country and sat down on gold pots.
As a matter of fact, we already understand what the political leadership.
Revolutionary salute to our Queen Kiana Perkins for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute.
Of Ukraine is. This is no longer a political leadership. It is a criminal group. It is an organized criminal community that has usurped power since March last year, in which, under the pretext of continuing the war with Russia, holds this power in Ukraine for the purpose of personal enrichment. This has now become a well-known fact based on the results of the anti-corruption investigation in Ukraine itself. And I think it's clear to everyone that these people, sitting on gold pots, hardly think about the fate of their country, about the fate of ordinary people in Ukraine, about the fate of officers, and even more so about the fate of ordinary soldiers. They don't care about them.
And right now, important news continues to come from Washington. The U.S. president said that Putin is determined for peace. Trump also said that the Baltic countries have nothing to worry about because the Ukrainian conflict will be resolved next Thursday. Trump again confirmed the information about deadline. Trump is confident that Russia is not seeking attacks on the Baltic states and Poland. In this regard, another unconditional result of this rather insane week is the fake screams of Warsaw. After the event on the Warsaw Railway, Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski shouted about Putin's state terrorism. He announced that, as revenge, Poland would allocate $100 million to purchase ammunition from the United States for Ukraine. And he closed the Russian consulate in Gdansk. Although the sabotage was committed by 2 Ukrainians. This is an official and proven fact. But Russia is still to blame. This is completely inadequate Russophobia.
Dear friends, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.
Okay, no doubt about it. I will look into that this week coming up. Probably Monday, brother. I got you.
Yes, please, Valentina Ivanovna.
Trump's 28-item peace plan on the Ukrainian crisis is currently being actively discussed around the world. May I ask you to express your...
The Ukrainians liable to pull a terrorist attack in the U.S. behind this. I'm telling you, there's a lot of them here.
Opinion and your attitude towards this plan before considering the main issues on the agenda?
They're blaming Trump in the U.S. before they surrender.
And how does this relate to your recent talks with Trump in Alaska?
Yes, of course. There is no secret here. We hardly discussed it publicly. We only talked about it in the most general terms. But this is no secret. President Trump's peace plan to resolve the situation in Ukraine was discussed even before the meeting in Alaska. And during this preliminary discussion, the American side asked us to make certain compromises, as they said, to show flexibility. The main point of the meeting in Alaska. The main purpose of the meeting in Alaska was that during the negotiations in Anchorage, we confirmed that despite certain difficult issues and difficulties, nevertheless, on our part, we agree with these proposals, and we are ready to show the flexibility offered to us. We have informed all our friends and partners of the Global South in detail about all these issues, including the People's Republic of China, India, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, South Africa, Brazil, and many other countries, and the CSTO countries, of course. All of our friends and partners, I want to emphasize this, every single one of them, they all supported these possible agreements. However, we see that after the negotiations in Alaska, there was a certain pause on the American side, and we know that this is due to Ukraine's actual rejection of the peace settlement plan proposed by President Trump. I assume that this is why a new version of this plan has appeared. In fact, it is already a modernized 28-item plan. We have this text. We have received it through the available channels of interaction with the American administration. I believe that this plan can also be used as the basis for a final peaceful settlement. But this text has not been discussed with us in detail. And I can guess why. I assume that the reason is the same. The United States administration has so far failed to secure the consent of the Ukrainian side. Ukraine is against it. Apparently, Ukraine and its European allies are still under illusions and dream of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. I think that this position is based not so much on the low level of their competence. But now I will not discuss this side of the matter. But, most likely, this position is due to their lack of objective information about the real situation on the battlefield. And, apparently, neither in Ukraine nor in Europe understand what this may eventually lead to. Here is just one, the most recent example, the city of Kupiansk. Most recently, as we recall, I think, on November 4th, that is, 2 weeks ago, Kiev publicly announced that there were no more than 60 Russian military personnel in this city. And over the next few days, as it was said, this city will be completely unblocked by Ukrainian troops. But I want to inform you. I would like to inform you that at that time, on November 4th, the city of Kupiansk was almost entirely in the hands of the Russian armed forces. Our guys, as they say, were already finishing. They were just clearing out individual blocks and streets. The fate of this city was already definitively decided at that moment. What does this mean? Either the Kiev leaders do not have objective information about the situation at the front, or, having this information, they are simply unable. They cannot objectively assess it.
No, they lie.
If Kiev does not want to discuss President Trump's proposals, and if they refuse to do so, then they, as well as the European warmongers, should understand that the events that took place in Kupiansk will inevitably be repeated in other key sectors of the front. It may not be as fast as we would like, but it will inevitably happen again. And in general, we are satisfied with this, since it leads to the achievement of the goals of the special operation by armed means, during the armed struggle. But, as I have said many times before, we are also ready for peaceful negotiations and peaceful solutions to problems. However, this requires, of course, a substantive discussion of all the details of the proposed plan. We are ready for this. Dear friends, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.
Friends, our brothers here with us. Larry Johnson, Carl Wilkerson. Larry is back from Russia. Right now he's in Florida. And Carl, welcome back.
Hey, good to be with you.
Good to be with you. And by the way, on the judge's show the other day, he mentioned you and he said, should he say, dear, 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 dear friend?
Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. And let me start, Larry, with you. You came from Russia and you know what's going on there. And we have the new 28-point plan on the part of the Trump administration. They're talking mostly, you look at these points, they have been published. I don't know who published these points. It was the Trump administration or the Zelensky administration. But the most important parts of this agreement, this plan, is that the recognition of Russian annexation of Crimea and 4 oblasts, and permanent neutrality of Ukraine. And then they're talking about the Russian media getting there in Ukraine. The cap on military size, it's 600,000. That would be the cap for the size of the military in Ukraine, and the election in 100 days. On the part of Russians, we've learned from Peskov and Maria Zakharova, both of them have confirmed that they have received no official document from the government in the United States. What's your take on what's going on right now?
Yeah, in fact, Pepe Escobar and I were interviewing Maria Wednesday. Let's see, today's Friday, so it was Wednesday. I've lost track of time, along with a fellow named Alexander Kazakov. And she said, you know, the judge asked her, we had the judge on remotely, and he asked her, and she goes, well, we haven't seen anything. You know, we've heard about it. Now, actually, there's a tweet, something out on X by Steve Witkoff. He put it up. Apparently, it was supposed to be a private message only, because once he got it, he went, whoops, got to take that down. He was actually blaming Kirill Dmitriev for it, that Kirill Dmitriev put it up. There's a fellow I've linked to the X account. I'm not sure if he's Ukrainian or Russian, but he posted these 28 points. If that is actually the document they've come up with, and it sounds legit, it's dead. Russians aren't going to go along with that at all, period. It's done. Example. Hey, we're going to cap off the Ukrainian military at 600,000. Well, Russia and Ukraine reached an agreement tentatively in Istanbul back in March of 2022, at which it was going to be like 85,000. So, and at the time, if you may not recall, but the ground force, the total size of active ground forces on Ukraine's side at the start of the special military operation was about 270,000. So why, in what delusional world does Witkoff and these guys that came up with this agreement think that Russia's going to go, oh, yeah, let's agree to triple the size of the Ukrainian military? I mean, that's assuming they could scrape together 600,000 people. That's a whole nother issue. I mean, I would say 50% of what is listed on those 28 points are non-starters from Russia's standpoint. Again, on the territory, yeah, they're going to recognize Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea as Russian territory, but Russia's got a freeze in place in Kherson and Zaporizhia freeze in place. They're not going to do that. They're winning. They're moving forward. This thing's only going to end with an unconditional surrender by Ukraine. Russia is not going to settle for anything less. They'll try to keep the lines of communication open, but just yesterday, Putin was with the frontline troops, and he told him, said, "Look, carry on until we achieve our objectives." Well, one of the key objectives is demilitarization of Ukraine, and that will happen either because the West will finally say, "Okay, we give up. We're gonna pull the plug." In the United States, Trump can do this today. Pull the plug on support for Ukraine. Stop sending them the money that they are stealing. But no, we won't do that. So Russia's going to finish it militarily. They're going to kill as many Ukrainian soldiers as they need to. They're going to continue to destroy Western soldiers that are inside Ukraine fighting, and they're going to keep destroying NATO equipment. That's how it will end.
Colonel, the size of the Ukrainian military before the war started, it was, if I'm not mistaken, 700,000, 400 active, soldiers and prepared for war, and 300, reservists, if I'm not mistaken. And right now they're talking about 600,000, something similar to what Ukraine was before the war started, and even larger than many other European countries. And how is that possible, in your opinion?
Let me take a little bit different position than Larry just evinced. And let me go back a little bit and start at the beginning of what I would say about it. And that beginning is Alaska. I was dead wrong about, not so wrong about Alaska, but wrong in the general concept of things. And I was very wrong about the call between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio. And let me explain why I say that. Out of Alaska came a more fundamental understanding of some very key issues that had nothing to do with Ukraine, really, except that Ukraine is an obstacle to going to those issues, like the security architecture of Europe, like the nuclear situation, particularly with no treaties, like New START going out in February of 26, and so forth. More progress was made on those issues than was evinced by either side. Then my real mistake was to characterize the call between Lavrov and Rubio as being non-productive, and mainly because of Rubio's obstinance. Au contraire, I'm told, by fairly competent authority, including Sergei Lavrov himself, they actually agreed that they were not ready for Budapest. They were not ready for Budapest, not because the Russians weren't ready. They've been ready for some time. They have all the paraphernalia of working groups, experts, teams, and so forth to do what's necessary to do, particularly to tackle these more serious issues than Ukraine. It was us that weren't ready at all. And so that's what put the kibosh on Budapest the first time around. Now I'm told that cooler heads have prevailed in the administration. I asked the question, name me one. But nonetheless, maybe down in the bowels of the expertise that might still remain at defense and state and other interested parties, they have put together at least a beginning of working teams, the kind of teams you would have for a real effective summit. Teams that can work the details, teams that can take the generalities that come out of the big guys and gals and go to work on the details that will make the agreement work or not work. And that's where they're headed now. And they're headed there with this, so-called plan that Witkoff has leaked or whatever, somebody leaked. And I don't discount the fact that some of the provisions the United States is putting forward are non-negotiable with Russia. But I also don't discount the fact that that's the way you do diplomacy. I'm not attributing that ability to this administration by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to think maybe down in the bowels, some people have prevailed. And there is some method to their madness. So they're not going in thinking that 600,000 will be the deal. They're not going in thinking that Russia will give up this or that in terms of territory gained. They're not going in without the idea that these things, they think, will be used as ammunition to maybe extract a few things out of Russia that might even be extractable given the situation now, and that won't be too embarrassing for Trump, because otherwise the deal would be extremely embarrassing for him. He steps in finally as the ultimate peacekeeper, and that is essentially what he is. There's no one else that can solve this really in a swift sort of fashion, if we can even use that term, given the length of its duration. But he's the only one who can settle it. And he's the only one who can tell the Europeans to go pound sand, and mean it, and make them go pound sand. So I don't have that negative view of what's coming about, but I don't have any hope really that they will be capable of carrying this out, that maybe the Russians won't get up midstream, as it were, and walk out. I think Larry's absolutely right about that. But I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for a little while and hope that something positive comes out of it. I've lost all faith in Witkoff. He's a scoundrel. So that's not a good thing. I've lost faith in Rubio a long time ago. But as I said, Lavrov sort of dissipated my negativism about that phone call in his description of it. Now, he might have been putting a fine tune on it that wasn't necessarily there in order to move things forward, but he's not usually that kind of diplomat. So I'm a little bit better, a little more optimistic opinion, and I can't believe I'm saying that about anything the Trump administration does.
Well, yeah, let me just add that it's not so much me being negative, but I think Larry, Colonel Wilkerson, for sake of not confusing the listeners, Larry, are you talking about yourself? No. Once this is formally submitted to the Russians, I'm sure that Lavrov and the foreign ministry will say something. Well, we have received an interesting proposal from the United States. It's one that we're going to carefully consider, and then, we'll talk about it. And the point is, out of those 28 things, man, there is a lot to talk about. And there's a lot in there that, frankly, reflects the continued U.S. delusion about Russia. The prime example is number 13. Number 13 on the list says, Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy. The lifting of sanctions will be discussed and agreed upon gradually and on an individual basis. The U.S. will conclude a long-term economic cooperation agreement aimed at mutual development. It goes through all these things that would be beneficial to the U.S. And Russia will be invited to return to the G8. Russia doesn't give two hot damns about getting invited to go back to the G8. Right now, BRICS, the BRICS members, they represent more of the global GDP, and they have a higher economic growth rate than all of the G7 combined. Why would Russia want to join a bunch of losers? That's like saying, we're going to invite you to join the team that finished last in Major League Baseball or NFL football. when you're playing for the championship, you say, thanks for the invite, but no. The other was that point 14. Oh, the Russian frozen assets will be used with $100 billion of it are going to be invested in U.S.-led reconstruction efforts in Ukraine. Oh, yeah, man. Russia's going to be all over that going, yeah, I'll take $100 billion of our money and put it into Ukraine. So that's what I mean. So there are lots of things that are going to have to be discussed. And this means if they get into actual discussions, as Colonel Wilkerson is noting, it's going to be this is not something that you resolve in a week or 2 weeks. This is, at least a 6-month discussion. Meanwhile, during that 6-month discussion, what we've seen in the last 2 days, Russia is breaking out into Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia. I mean, they're literally, they have punched through the defensive lines of Ukraine. The Ukrainian defensive line is collapsing. So all of this may be moot when they actually get down to saying, do we have an agreement capable of signing?
Nima, let me make a point that reinforces what Larry just said in a different venue, and then another point after that. I just listened to Max Blumenthal tell the judge essentially that Russia and China, in vetoing 2083, I think it was, the nefarious, internationally illegal UN Security Council resolution, Guterres should go bury his head in the sand with regard to Gaza. And why did they veto? And he said, well, they don't want to piss off the United States. Good Lord, have mercy, Max. You're usually smarter than a whip.
Yeah.
Russia and China did not veto because they're looking at the United States destroying itself. Why should they veto a good complement to that destruction?
Yeah, they abstained. Remember, they abstained. They didn't veto.
Yeah. Well, abstained. They did not veto, is what I was saying.
Correct.
And they wouldn't want to do that because they're winning. They're winning astronomically. So why would you want to keep the empire from going further down? And that's exactly what this resolution will do, codifying the slaughter under international auspices in Gaza. And then the second thing I wanted to say is, and I mentioned this too on the judge's show. I didn't have much time, but if you look at anything that might transpire and come to a even remotely successful conclusion with regard to Ukraine, the problem is going to be the Nazis. It doesn't matter who you elect. Well, yeah, it does. Get rid of Zelensky and get back to some kind of electoral process that looks remotely democratic, and you put someone else in there. The people who will violate any kind of agreement that they come to are the Nazis. And they're prolific and many. And Russia will have no incentive to violate anything, but they will have to eradicate the Nazis in order to have any chance of any agreement sustaining itself. So that's a fly in the ointment that I don't think we understand at all. And part of the reason is because we've been using those people. We've been using them all along.
Yeah.
Bandera's our boys. Those Bandera lookalikes, they're all our boys and girls. Just as we did after World War II with Operation Paperclip and some other things, we're using them. And that's going to be very difficult to abate because they won't abate. They will keep on doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and just to reinforce Colonel Wilkerson's point, the West, and the United States in particular, we've embarked on the strategy of thinking that we can use insurgencies and subversion to weaken Russia. We tried it in 1999 with what's known now as the Second Chechen War, and the West does not pay attention to Russia's history. That Second Chechen War was one funded and initiated with significant input from the United States and the Brits, where we were basically taking a lot of the Mujahideen, these Islamic extremists, these Sunnis, out of Afghanistan, integrating them with others from the Caucasus, from the various stands, and then putting them into Chechnya. Now, actually, the Chechens and General Abdi Aludinov made the point with Pepe and I on Wednesday. I had a chance to talk to him as well. He said, look, the Chechens were actually fighting against this outside influence, but it was a bloody affair. It went on 10 years. It was actually Medvedev was president when they ended the fighting. And you think that kind of civil war would leave such a lingering bad taste in the mouth of the people of Chechnya? Not so. Chechnya today is probably one of the most modern of the Russian republics. The mosques are magnificent. They've got, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest mosque in the world, maybe the second largest mosque in the world is in Chechnya. I forget, it's not in Grozny, it's in another location. And what you have are like people like Aludinov in the Akhmat battalions, which are very, very pro-Russian, very patriotic. My point in that is Russia's got a history of dealing with these, like neo-Nazis, fanatic, call them whatever you want, that Russia does have a history of dealing with them, of destroying them, and reconstituting society. They've done it. We haven't, but they've actually done it in Chechnya. And I'd use Chechnya as a potential model for what could happen in Ukraine. Because, Colonel Wilkerson's exactly right. These neo-Nazis, man, they're not going away. So if they don't go away, you're gonna either have to capture them or kill them. Russia's very practical when it comes down to that. They would prefer to negotiate and to get them to, put away their hatred. But the Russians they're not naive. I mean, their history has taught them it's pretty damn dangerous to be naive. So you have to be very practical. And, I think that this, as these negotiations surrounding this possible peace plan go on, Russia it's going to accelerate. They're going to roll up they'll have control of the Dnieper River from basically Kiev on down. And once you've got control of the east bank of the Dnieper River, you're in a position you strangle any economic possibility for Ukraine. They will have to deal with Russia or they'll die.
Colonel, correct me if I'm mistaken, because to my understanding, when you talk about these sensitive issues, particularly when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, most of these points that have been mentioned in this document are so sensitive, yet you have to negotiate, you have to talk about them behind the closed doors, and it's a diplomacy, it's not something related to the media. But when you put all of them out, it seems that you're not serious in achieving anything. What is that, in your opinion? Why do they need to publish these points without reaching any agreement with the Russian part?
It's become a major component of American diplomacy. And I have to admit, it goes back a long way. It goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan and even before that. The last president to do things, in my view, furtively, as it were, and to do things successfully was Richard Nixon. And the most prominent place he did that, of course, was with Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong in China. We don't believe in that kind of diplomacy anymore. We believe in being secretive only for a moment or two and using that secretiveness and then the exposure of that secretiveness as a part of our negotiating tactics. We're stupid, in other words. We're probably certainly the world's most incompetent, great power at diplomacy. But I think we're the world's most incompetent power, period, at diplomacy. And that's a sad deficit, especially when you're really an empire. But that's the kind of way we do things. And it almost always rebounds to our discredit and our losing. So we have to do other things that are more nefarious in order to try to reverse the situation and win. But in this case, to go back to my original comments, which I said were guarded in terms of being optimistic, this is Trump's particular way of negotiating. And I think Witkoff has proven again and again now, in my original opinion of him, of being an adult at a picnic of idiots, is totally wrong. He's an idiot too, similar to them, maybe a little more polished, but he's an idiot, just like Jared Kushner and the rest of them. They're all interested in money. That's their main thing. They've confused diplomacy with what is stark reality that they have been disregarding for a long time now, arguably ever since, and I'm talking about America, arguably since 2014, and I'd even go back earlier than that to when I was monitoring the Ukraine situation very closely back to 2002. So what does that mean for what we're planning to do now? It means the Russians, as Larry indicated, are going to dominate completely. And are we going to be able to massage that with our leaks and our media contacts and our idiots who go on TV and talk about it, to the extent that we can salvage some of Trump's stature as it progresses? I don't know. That may be the most difficult thing to do, because we're going to lose, win, win. And the things we win on maybe are the most important things of all. And that's some kind of decent future with regard to nuclear weapons and treaties to monitor them, and bringing all the nuclear weapon states into that regime. Not to mention the fact that we need to extend New START, take Putin up on his offer to extend it a year without even any questions, and then work on extending it and expanding it permanently. These are far more serious issues than Ukraine. I hate to say that about people who've died on both sides, but they are far more serious issues than Ukraine, and we need to get to them. And if that's all that comes out of it successfully, then it's a good negotiation. Ukraine be damned. But that's the reality of the whole situation. They're going to win and we're going to lose, and we need to massage the loss. And we have proven of late, with the Epstein files in particular as a domestic issue, and other things like the situation with Israel, that we're not very good at managing loss, especially loss in the media, which damages Donald Trump.
Yeah. Larry, Bloomberg reported that Merz, Macron, and Starmer are teaming up with Zelensky to block key elements of the U.S. plan. And what is the position of Europe today? What do they want from because as time goes by, it doesn't seem that the Ukrainian case would be that much, a winning card for Europe, because they're losing too much. I don't know how long do they want to continue with that strategy.
Well, what's it called? Is it the term sunk cost fallacy? Once you put all your money in, then you go out and you borrow more money so you can put more money you gamble more money at the casino. That's what Europe is doing.
Reinforcing strategic idiocy.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be the RSI. When we talk anything involving military, we got to have an acronym, as Colonel Wilkerson will recall. The Russians genuinely believe they see Europe not as a potent military threat, but definitely as somebody, let's call it like a pedophile lurking around a kindergarten that you're going to have to deal with them, and dealing with them, I mean defeat them. They don't want to do that, but as General Aladinov told Pepe and me on Wednesday, he goes, he was basically talking about the acronym FAFO, and he said, well, the French thought it was a good idea to invade us in 1812, and he says in 1814 we paid them a visit in Paris. He said the Germans thought it was a good idea to attack us. We went to Berlin. He said, so if this current group of Europeans persists this way, we'll go where we have to go. We'll do what we need to do, because we're going to do everything necessary to protect ourselves. That is the Russian mentality right there. They're not interested in conquering or occupying Europe, but by God, they're not going to let them stand by and continue to threaten and kill Russians, because these European states are doing it. Now, what you have in Europe right now is a tremendous disconnect between the leadership and the public.
Yeah,
I mean, good God! I mean, Merz, Macron, and Starmer, they are their popularity combined doesn't break 50%. If you could take each of their public opinion stance from each country and add them all together. But nonetheless, they will continue to make stupid decisions. However, they're constrained. They don't have they don't have an American Express black card. American Express black card means you got like unlimited access to money. You can buy whatever you want. You don't have to worry about paying for it. No, they're broke. And they don't have anybody else standing out there saying, hey, we're willing to lend you multiple $1 billion. And while all this is going on, you've got this, the scandal that is gripping Ukraine to an extent of the $100 million fraud. This is a multi-billion-dollar. We're talking at least $48 billion have been stolen and siphoned off. And you back that up with the fact that Europe does not have an industrial base to produce weapons to keep the Ukrainians in the war right now as it is. And they certainly don't have a magical machine that produces soldiers, because that's what Ukraine is running out of right now at a rate that they can't replace it. They're losing, in terms of casualties, 40,000 a month killed and wounded. And then add to that at least, and these numbers are not from some pro-Russian source. This is from people like the Institute for the Study of War, very much a pro-Ukrainian outfit, saying that between 20 and 40,000 Ukrainians a month are deserting. They're going, no, we're not sticking around for this. So you got anywhere between 60 and 80,000 losses on the Ukrainian front. And they're only recruiting 25,000 a month. Do the math. So all of this nonsense coming out of Europe, the Russians have a wary eye at him, and they will punch him in the nose if necessary. But the Russians are focused right now exclusively upon defeating the Ukrainians and by extension NATO. And let me jump back to, why did Russia abstain? As Colonel Wilkerson said, yeah, they're not going to. They don't want to give the United States an excuse that if Russia and China had vetoed it, the United States would say, see, we're trying to get peace. They're blocking peace. They just said, no, okay, we're not going to stop the United States. But Russia is not in a position where it's going to get militarily involved in either Venezuela or Gaza or Iran until this war with NATO is settled. Once that's out of the way, then they can adjust their foreign policy. But the Russians are smart enough to recognize they don't need to fight a 2 or 3 front war. They're going to take care of business, just like Stalin did in the Great Patriotic War, World War II. They didn't deploy troops to the east to fight the Japanese. They stayed focused on dealing with the Nazis. When they got the Nazis settled, then they told the U.S., okay, we'll come help you out with the Japanese.
Colonel, today Peskov was mentioning something important on the part of Russians, which is that the talks that is going on between the United States and Russia is they want to separate the relationship between the United States and Russia from what's going on in Ukraine. They want to talk about Ukraine, but in a separate manner. It's not. But it seems that the United States, Washington, is pushing for just somehow they want to merge the two. But how do you see the situation with Washington? Can they talk separately? The ties, the relationship between the two countries, the two superpowers, they can talk to each other. And then separately talking about Ukraine.
Well, it should be the case. They should be able to talk separately about the one and the other. But politics, in particular domestic politics in this country, will make things merge from time to time, particularly as the Democrats begin to realize that they're making headway against Trump. And they are. Day by day, they're making headway against him. And they're even recruiting some of the Republicans to help them. And I don't mean Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean some other Republicans that are having serious thoughts, particularly in the Senate, about where the country's headed under Trump. And under the Republican Party, they realize that too. But I think Larry's right that the issues that Russia is going to be adamant on are going to foil Trump's attempt in any way to politically capitalize on what happens with regard to Ukraine. And that's a big animal to try and combat, because if Trump feels like the Ukraine side of the equation, if you will, is hurting him dramatically in his chance to get what is he on now? 32nd war? And this would be the 33rd and the most important, that he's the peace bringer in. You know?
Yeah.
If he feels like that, yeah, that's being complicated, and maybe complicated to an extent that he's not going to get any credit at all. In fact, maybe discredit. Then that's going to complicate the other side. It just has to, the way we work. So I'm worried about what you just said, that you can't separate the two ultimately because of domestic politics for Trump.
Larry, the other thing that the Russians are talking about, that they are behind the scene, they're negotiating with the United States, but the level of negotiations are not that much advanced to achieve anything. You know, it's somehow Donald Trump came out with this 28 point of the plan. You know, it seems that they didn't, share.
Yeah, Donald Trump can't count to 28.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But who's doing that? If it's not Donald Trump, who's behind the scene doing this?
Well, look, Trump has he's approved the negotiating process, and so the silver lining here, the good news, is the United States at least has come up with some very specific proposals to try. There's been some thinking. This was not just. This wasn't a sophomoric attempt. There was some genuine thinking that went into this document. But sorry, I was glancing off to the side, but I just saw the headline on RT. The Kremlin, and the foreign ministry both say, we haven't gotten anything yet from the United States. Okay, so I don't know if the leak of this document was intended to sabotage the process, but the point was the United States at least has prepared a document. And the Russians are very, they love this kind of thing in a way. Give us some specifics and we'll sit down and negotiate. We'll talk it through. We want to go through it, and we'll tell you why that doesn't work for us. And you tell, they're willing to sit down and talk. So that's the positive. The negative of it, as I pointed out earlier, is it's written strictly from a U.S. standpoint of U.S. assumptions about Russia and U.S. Desire to maintain some control over Ukraine and to keep Ukraine in the fight. Because, right now, I don't think the United States is genuinely interested in reaching a solid peace with Russia. Because in the back of our mind, we still got our projects in the Caucasus. We're still trying to destabilize Georgia. We're working hard to get Armenia and Azerbaijan to throw some monkey wrenches in Russia's foreign policy. We're there courting the various stands, the Tajikistans, the Kazakhstans, Turkmenistans. Because why? We want to weaken Russia. That is the ultimate U.S. goal. The United States is not saying, by God, we want Russia to be our best friend. We want to have a critical relationship with them because they've got resources we need, and we want to make sure we'll have a solid friendship. Because Maria Zakharova said on Wednesday as well. She said, "Hey, the only one that's stopping us from having direct flights between Washington and Moscow is Donald Trump and the Trump administration. We're ready to talk about that. How about reopening consulates? How about normalizing diplomatic relations? Russia's willing. Russia's not saying, no, you've got to do this, and then you have to jump through this hoop, and you have to provide. Russia's laying no preconditions on that. Said, hey, let's get back to having normal relations like we did during the Cold War, for God's sake, and then we can talk about these issues. It's the Trump administration that's refusing. And it's not just Trump. It's not fair to just pin it all on him, because if Trump tried to do that, the Democrats and many Republicans would be attacking Donald Trump as a sellout to Putin. So the United States is busy setting itself on fire and then complaining about the fact that we don't have a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Which is precisely what empires that are expiring do throughout history.
Colonel, Reuters reported that today, they reported that the United States threatens to cut intel weapons to press Ukraine into peace deal. And on the part of Zelensky, I think we have to consider what Zelensky is talking about. Just moments ago, he's saying that they're pushing us toward a difficult choice, either losing dignity or risking the loss of our key sponsor, which is the United States. It seems that Zelensky is in a tough position right now. He has to decide about it. I don't know what's going on in Washington, but they're putting a lot of pressure on Zelensky as well.
I think they've given up on Zelensky, if that's the right phrase to use. A better way to describe it, although bloody-minded, is that they wish he'd get out of the way. They wish something would happen to get him out of the way. I'm frankly surprised that we haven't hired Mossad to do it, except that Mossad might object because Mossad is getting things from this too. But at the end of the day, I think we have to have a different leader in Kyiv in order to move forward. I think that's true with regard to Russia, given the statements they've made about not wanting to have Zelensky in the deal. And it's true with regard to us. But you're fighting people like Lindsey Graham. And I think Marco Rubio, too. I don't know if I mentioned to you what Tucker Carlson said before about, I couldn't believe this when I heard it, but I heard the tape. I think it was Candace Owen that played the tape. When he was actually giving Trump serious advice and Trump was listening to him, apparently in a serious way, they were talking about the vice presidential candidate, and Tucker said, no, you don't want Marco Rubio. And Trump asked him, why do you say I should take Vance and not Marco Rubio? And Tucker said, because they'll assassinate you to get to Marco Rubio. And Lindsey Graham would pay the money for the assassin. So that's kind of the thing you're up against with regard to making some kind of deal with Russia that's strategically palatable and strategically successful. At the same time, you're negating all these people who want to bleed Russia to the last soul, to the last drop of blood. Again, the domestic political situation is going to make it extremely difficult. But Zelensky is going to make it even more difficult if he stays around. So I think he's got to be gotten rid of in some way. I hate to use that expression because somewhat, but he needs to be gotten rid of.
Yeah.
Larry, I really do believe that if Donald Trump is serious in putting pressure on Zelensky, he has to put pressure on the British government and British intelligence because they're behind Zelensky. And do you see anything of that sort happening?
Well, no. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. It should happen. I actually had I'll be posting an interview either today or tomorrow, one that I did with a former colonel in the Ukrainian GUR who defected to Russia. He admitted he'd become a Russian intelligence asset in about 2015, and he worked for the Russians for 3 years until it got too hot for him and he had to bail out with his family. But he said really this has been much more of a CIA operation than it has been a British operation. He said, yeah, the Brits are involved, but the CIA was putting its nose under the tent going back to 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
So, Donald Trump's got it. We could tell the agency, you're out, you're done, pull the plug, leave. But, the 20 years, 30 years of investment down the toilet. And the agency might resist that, but it wasn't just confined to this guy's name is Vasily. it wasn't just Vasily's point of view. You know, I heard it from a variety of different Russians that you know, the United States, if they pull the plug and walk away, this thing will be over. It's not going to continue. So they do see the United States as the major antagonist in this entire affair, and yet that still like to be friendly with the United States. Why? Because in the back of their mind, they still have what I'll call sort of a 1950s image. At least in the United States, it's a Christian nation, and Russians are a Christian nation, even though they've got 140 different ethnic groups, and you know, you got a variety of Muslims. They got one of the largest Muslim populations in the world, at least as a percentage of the population. Hindus, Buddhists, etc. But nonetheless, Russia sees itself as this Christian nation, and sees the United States as something that they are, you know, empathetic with, sympathetic with. At the same time, though, they recognize the corruption that is in the West and the moral decay that is in the West. And frankly, I think the Russians sort of believe that maybe they can help the United States find its way back from this abyss of you know, gender confusion and pedophilia and all these other things that continue to plague us. So it's, you know, the United States is the problem, and not so much the Brits. You know, they're like a nasty little chihuahua. You know, they say that anybody that's ever had a chihuahua, and chihuahua owners will back me up on this. The meaner they are, the longer they live. Okay, you see like a 20-year-old chihuahua, that's one mean son of a bitch. Okay, so that's sort of the Brits. But the Brits can cause some harm. They're malevolent, but man, they're not the empire power that they were 100 years ago, 150 years ago.
If you want to read a good book, John le Carré's The Tailor of Panama, if you haven't read it, it just gives the Brits everything Larry just described.
Carl, shifting the gear to what's going on in Venezuela, and we know that so far the USS Gerald Ford carriers, you know, the carrier is there close to Venezuela. B-1s, B-52s, Tomahawk capable destroyers are positioned there. Special operation aviations are rehearsing off Venezuela's coast. All these together, what is the implication of all these movements on the part of the United States toward Venezuela, and what we're going to see there? And because on the part of Venezuela, we've learned that Maduro was trying to say, I want peace, I don't want war, and mentioning that over and over. And today he said that we are prepared to fight the United States. What are we going to see in Venezuela? Do you think, are we going to see some sort of attacks, aerial attacks, or are they going to go on the ground fighting Venezuelans?
Let me get my crystal ball.
Yeah.
I think this is just my personal opinion. I've gotten all the facts that I could get my hands on, such as they are these days. But my personal opinion is Trump is just doing this to be doing it. And by that, I mean, he wants to force something to happen that'll be positive, whether it's oil or a different situation with the opposition in Caracas or whatever is irrelevant. He's just doing it because he wants something to come out of it that's positive and will rebound to his credit politically in the United States. And it'll be another war that he didn't start. That sounds facetious until you think it's Donald Trump that's doing this. He's made remarks all along here, and he puts them in at very tactically, even strategic points that indicate he doesn't want a conflict with Venezuela. He doesn't want to use this array of force that he's put out there to do anything untoward towards Venezuela. He wants Maduro to cave, or he wants the opposition to be successful. And so, of course, that's backfiring majorly, because now you have somewhere between 60. I have a student down there in Caracas who used to be at William & Mary, and he's fairly high up in the hierarchy. He was born in Venezuela. What they're doing in his view is they're putting 60 to 70% of the portion of Venezuela that might be called a genuine opposition to Maduro on Maduro's side, because they don't like what Trump is doing with regard to their state. And it's understandable that the opposition that is with Trump, the Machados and others, is really very few people in Venezuela now. So the situation in terms of a military operation grows more serious every day if that's true, and you have 90% of Venezuela that's going to oppose it in any way they possibly can. So I don't really think that this is anything more than a show of force designed to extract whatever they can out of Maduro, and then Trump will say, well, look what we got, blah, 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 and then it'll be declared a success, and off will sail the Gerald Ford and the rest of the military apparatus is there. The thing that worries me, truly worries me, is what the commander of Southern Command made his announcement of early departure about. And the more I parse it and the more I examine it, it's got something to do, if not a lot to do, with the fact that we have passed everything in the United States military that pertains to what I would call paramilitary or direct action in concert with the CIA or whatever, to the Special Operations Command. I saw this happen in Somalia, where we went after Mohammed Farah Aidid and had to ignominiously leave Somalia and Mogadishu because of that. And we didn't tell the conventional force commanders anything about it. I think that's happening now in spades with Venezuela. That is to say, the mothership is down there, the converted cruise ship. All of the soft elements that are attached to that are down there. This includes SEALs, it includes Rangers, it includes Delta, all the really potent soft that the CIA uses from time to time for its direct action. And they are the ones perturbating the situation. He didn't like that, just like our commander in ISAF in Afghanistan and Kabul didn't like that when SOCOM would direct activities in Afghanistan and he would know nothing about them until the Chinook crashed and people were killed. And he would say, what's going on in my AOR? I think that's happening big time down there. And so that's a part of the situation that disturbs me, because these people are, in some cases, ashore, already doing things. And they're already doing things kinetically. So this is a recipe, again, for disaster for the empire if we don't shut it down and mind our own business to a certain extent.
Larry, go ahead.
Well, I say, when I teach a firearms class, I don't allow loaded firearms in the classroom, because if you got a loaded gun and you're passing it around, at some point, somebody's likely to do something stupid by putting their finger on the trigger and having a negligent discharge. And the parallel is what we've done we've got all these U.S. forces alerted, armed, primed, and deployed, ready to go. But day after day, I mean, we're now 3 months into this at least. They're out there armed and ready. You can only stay at a high level of alert so long before your capability starts degrading, or people get sloppy. There's going to be something, an accident could happen. And Colonel Wilkerson is right that this Hollywood mythology about special operations forces dominates a lot of our political thinking and has since 9/11. And look, I've worked with that community, good God, going, now almost 40 years. So I know it inside and out, from apart from the ones that are conventionally known to other units that are what they call SAPs and are black programs, and we don't, the average person doesn't know about them. They've got great capabilities for a very limited number of missions. So you've got the Somali pirates that have taken over the Maersk, Alabama. Yeah, great mission. That's something the SEALs could do and did do, and took it back. And, killed the bad guys in that situation. But overthrowing a regime, sorry, they may be able to go in and kill a couple of people, but Delta Force. What's needed in Venezuela, if you're going to do regime change, is a Green Beret mission. And Green Beret are not special operations forces; they're special forces. And one of the things they do different from special operations guys we're black, we're top secret, we can't tell you about ourselves. Whereas the Green Berets are taught, hey, go out and make friends with the locals, eat their food, live with them, dress like them, talk like them, interact with them, be their buddies. I mean, it's a completely different mindset. And that, in fact, you find one of the tensions that existed within Delta Force was early on the try to take more Rangers, because the Rangers have a completely different mindset than do Green Beret. Now there are some soldiers that have both the Green Beret tab and the Ranger tab, but it's still, I don't mean to get so much into the weeds on this, but it's important that people understand how some of these military mindsets work. So I think what Trump's going to come up against is the fact that he can't get a guaranteed success, that if we launch any military operation, it's going to turn out well. That very well could be, the Venezuelans are more militarily capable than the Houthis. They don't have as many long-range missiles, but by God, they've got enough air-to-surface missiles that they can fire from F-16s that could make it a really bad day for U.S. naval forces off the coast. So I think all of this is probably driving towards coming up with what will ultimately be a diplomatic solution. And it wouldn't surprise me to see China and Russia behind the scenes helping, sort of encouraging Trump, showing that he can get a victory. They will establish that there's going to be elections. But as Colonel Wilkerson noted, what Trump's policy so far has done is made Maduro more popular, not less. And in fact, if it goes to an election, he'll be able to say, look, I'm the one that stood up to Trump, and Trump didn't dare take us down militarily because he can't.
Just to reinforce what Larry's talking about, one of the things that made Colin Powell most angry about Operation Just Cause in Panama and the snatch mission against Noriega was a group of special operators. And what they did was they produced the most casualties in a shorter period of time than any other element in the entire invasion force. I mean, they just came online, about 11 of them, and with machine guns blaring, attacked a PDF group. 5 out of the 9, I think, were killed instantly, and 4 others were wounded.
Yeah, that was the air. They tried to take down. It was the Navy SEALs that tried to take down this airfield, which now is actually a shopping mall, if you can believe it. And it was, and I had a buddy of mine that actually worked in the counterterrorism office at the time. He was a Navy SEAL commander, and man, he was livid over the SEAL chain of command that had signed off on this operation, because he said, if your concern is to take out the airplane, Noriega's airplane, put up a C-130 Spectre gunship, blow the hell out of it, and you don't put anybody's life at risk. But no, this one SEAL captain, man, he saw this as his chance to, hey, look what my boys can do, and he put them unnecessarily at risk and got a bunch of them killed, and a couple of them, were turned into quadriplegics. They lost control of their arms and legs and are confined to a wheelchair. Just stupid.
It was almost as bad as the F-117s that Powell tried to keep out of the operation, and Cheney weighed in, the Congress weighed in, had to put them in it. They went down and dropped bombs on the Comandancia, 2,000-pound satellite-guided bombs. Great success, declared the Air Force afterwards. First use of the F-117s in combat. Well, Michael Gordon for the New York Times went down there with a tape measure and measured the distance from one of the craters to the Comandancia. It was a total miss and a great embarrassment.
Yeah.
Colonel, here is what the former Bush and Trump official Marshall Billingsley. He said about, his name is Marshall Billingsley. He said about the end game in Venezuela.
Fostered the socialist plague that has spread across Latin America. It's the Venezuelans. It's corrupt, dirty Venezuelan money that underwrote the Petro campaign. They funneled money into Mexico. They funneled money into Brazil. Once we have democracy restored in Venezuela, all of that subversion money that has been underwriting the socialist campaigns around the region dries up. So does the oil revenues to the Cuban regime, all of the support to the Nicaraguans. We forget about what Ortega is doing to the Nicaraguan people. It's a travesty. So the solution begins with a key point here.
Yeah.
He needs to come into the real world. Venezuela and other countries cut off Cuba a long time ago. Otherwise, Cuba wouldn't be the basket case it is with regard to HFO and other things it needs desperately. I'm working with the Melissa hurricane victims right now, and you wouldn't believe how bad the situation is in Santiago de Cuba, for example. And it's largely because of the blockade, but also because of the countries that were helping them have been cut off. And let's look at what Marco Rubio just did in consonance with what this guy just said. He was down there trying to get the presidents of the so-called rightist, in South American definitions, regimes to be on our side to unseat Lula, get him out, get Lula gone, because Lula's a tragic thing for South America. And I guess you know what they told him. And you know what the Ecuadorian people told their leader, who is a rightist and who was going to allow us to come back. They said no by about 60% in a referendum. Bolivia's president, apparently also classified as a rightist, said, no, Lula's an important figure. I do a lot of business with him. Screw you, get out of here. So it didn't work very well. But that's the purpose, and that's what that guy was insinuating with regard to Maduro. No doubt, probably Maduro does send some money around, as do other leaders in South America, the same way we do to try and influence governments all across the face of the globe with regard to politics. But the bottom line of what that guy was saying is he's not plugged in on a timely basis, and he's stupid. And I'd say the same thing about Marco Rubio, who seems to have a vendetta against all Latin American countries, particularly Cuba, upon whose soil he has never set a foot. And our policy with respect to South America and Latin America in general today is abysmal. It's as abysmal as our policies in other places. So the empire strikes out again. And he's a perfect example of how it strikes out and why it strikes out.
Of course, Colonel Wilkerson used a curious word, policy. I wasn't aware that we had any.
Bingo. Bingo.
Yeah.
Larry, what do you make of this, the news that is breaking out on X? He's talking about the ex spy Jonathan Pollard. He had a secret meeting with Mike Huckabee at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. What is that? What was the meeting about? Because I would argue, because this guy, I don't know if you saw the interviews that the Jonathan Pollard did recently. He was talking about the CIA being against Israel. CIA, yeah. He mentioned CIA as one of the enemies of Israel.
Yeah. No, I think Huckabee is talking to Pollard in order to try to defang any of the anti-Zionist crowd that still is somewhere buried in the bureaucracy in the United States intelligence and military community. I mean, Pollard is a loathsome, despicable, and fat human being. I mean, he's just, he's loyal. He's loyal to Israel, not loyal to the United States. It is what it is. But it just shows, Huckabee's not loyal to the United States either. He's loyal to Israel first and foremost. That's the problem. The Zionists. This is one more example of this Zionist crowd. Because remember, Huckabee's not Jewish, but by God, he is an ardent Zionist. And out of this nonsensical Christian crap about, Israel is God's chosen people and the Lord Jesus is going to come back, all that nonsense. it is the foundation for a lot of terrible policies. And yet, here's Huckabee embracing it. So, but it's really created now a split in the Republican Party and the MAGA base that is not going away. If anything, as the Zionists tried more desperately to regain control and to quash all these people, the Candace Owens and the Tucker Carlsons and the Nick Fuentes, all the people speaking out, it's having the exact opposite effect. It's creating more opposition to the Zionists.
Nima, if Trump were smart, right now he'd capitalize on this small victory, but nonetheless a victory, especially given what Larry just said about what's happening within MAGA right now. He'd recall him and fire him.
Yeah.
There was an interview, Colonel, with the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He mentioned that 3 times Iranian team has reached some sort of agreement with Witkoff, and they came to some sort of solutions 3 times. And whenever Witkoff went back to Washington talking with the people in Washington, he came back and said that that's not possible. In your opinion, who's running the show in Washington toward the case of Iran? Because when Witkoff goes there and agrees on something and they comes back to Washington and says something different, what's your take on that?
I think it's the guy that Tucker Carlson warned Trump about, that he'd be assassinated were he to be the vice president. And not necessarily Marco Rubio himself, though I think that's a big component of it, but the people whom he channels, people like Lindsey Graham and others. We forget, and I was reminded of this many times during the period that we were contemplating the illegal war with Iraq for aggression. We have legislation in the Congress of the United States that makes official U.S. policy regime change, going back to the past, in Iraq, and regime change in Iran. And Lindsey Graham was a big part of that. Others in his coterie were. So that's the element that will not rest, just as they are wanting to bleed Russia through Ukraine with even more vehemence. They will not rest until there's regime change in Tehran.
Yeah.
Here is part of the interview that the foreign minister of Iran did with The Economist.
Are in favor of a deal, but a fair and balanced deal. The problem is when Americans, the current administration, talk about a deal, in fact, they want to dictate what they want. And this is what we experienced. As recently as 2 months ago in New York, we are ready for negotiation, but not for dictation. We are ready to go for a deal, but for a fair and balanced deal, not a one-sided deal.
How prepared are you if there were a follow-on Israeli attack on Iran?
We are even more prepared than the previous war.
Can you elaborate? In what way are you prepared?
Our missiles are, in a better position, quantity-wise and quality-wise. We have learned many lessons during the 12-day war. We have learned, we understood our weak points and our points of strength, and Israelis' weak points. They have worked on all of them, and they are fully prepared, even better than the previous time. It doesn't mean that we want war. As the best way to prevent a war is to be prepared for that. Russians helped us a lot during 12 days of war, and after that we have been engaged in more cooperation than before, and this is why I'm telling you that we are even more prepared than previous war.
This is the first time they're talking about, at least I've never heard before, that they're talking about the Iranians, the cooperation between Iranians and Russians during the 12-day war, Larry.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I just saw a report yesterday that Araghchi has had 3 conversations with Lavrov in the last 5 days. So there's something going on behind the scenes. But and they didn't even mention the Chinese. There's been also a significant uptick in cooperation on the military and diplomatic front between Iran and China. Both Russia and China recognize that Iran is in it's a critical resource, geostrategic resource, for both countries, and so they're not going to stand by and watch the West destroy Iran. In fact, they're going to do everything they can to help them. Now, and Iran's got some critical issues right now, particularly with water, and they may have to actually relocate the capital to another part of Iran where they can at least have guaranteed water. And it'll be a shift in the national life of the Iranian people, but they're not going to surrender.
It's a long plan, it goes long back. And I remember they were talking about, moving the embassy of oil to the southern part of Iran, to the southwest of Iran. And it's all going, they're planning on it for such a long time. Larry, what is, looking at what the foreign minister of Iran just said, they're prepared to negotiate with the United States, but they're not going to be forced into negotiations, what he was talking about. What is the point for the American part, in your opinion? What he's talking about, is that going to resonate with the Trump administration?
You meant that for Colonel Wilkerson, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about Colonel, you. Yeah.
The other Larry.
God knows if it's going to resonate with them. But I will tell you this, I was looking at Haaretz this morning, and right in the center, a key story was there will be a war with Iran. And I think that's the critical question right now. And I agree with that. I think before Christmas now, I'll postpone it a bit, unless the situation for Netanyahu politically becomes so dire that he's kicked out. And I'm hearing more and more about the possibilities of that. That discounts, though, that whomever takes over for him will be the same, just a little more low key and maybe not quite as adept at murder. Does that mean that will also waylay this business of attacking Iran? I don't think so. So I think what I'm hearing from Iran too, and you mentioned this the other day, is they're convinced it's coming too. And so I think we're in for a very cataclysmic situation in Southwest Asia, particularly if Bibi uses the nuclear weapon threat against Trump to make Trump come in. And I don't think for a moment he won't do that. I will use a nuclear weapon unless you bail me out. And then all the other incentives that Trump has. And then we're off to the races. I think that's probably the unwinding of the empire in a far more rapid and swift way than I thought otherwise. But I think that's what we're headed for.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colonel. And
many points to it, 28, and there's been a lot of reactions. Zelensky has said it's either this or a harsh winter. Europe is in panic, and we can get to Russia's response. Vladimir Putin just responded, but first, your reaction to this development. How does it fit into your travels? Take it away.
Well, I mean, the main purpose of this trip was to come to Russia and initiate a dialogue about arms control, about the danger of nuclear weapons, and it's been a very difficult task because, what generally happens is the Russians are very open, and they're willing to have these complex discussions as long as there's not a major diplomatic initiative in the wind. And I've sort of gotten unlucky twice. In August, I went to Russia to engage in similar discussions. But when I landed, they announced that Vladimir Putin was going to be flying to Alaska to meet Trump. And so everything I was planning on doing didn't get done because they basically put a freeze on any, significant political discussion because they don't want to, generate anything that undermines that diplomatic effort. And on this trip, there were significant expectations, and I know that the Russians were working very hard to fulfill many of my requests. But they came back and with a very cryptic note of this just isn't the time to do this. And now we know why, because there was this Miami deal in the works. And so even though the Russian government has been sort of hands off on this, indicating that, they don't know anything, in detail about this, unless Putin said something that I'm not aware of. Before I go on, Putin didn't come out and embrace this. That's my understanding.
Yeah, we can actually play what Vladimir Putin has said. He did address the Security Council, but as you said, it is a very specific kind of message and mostly focused on Ukraine and Europe's response. But here's a bit of what he said.
The Kiev leaders have no information on the situation on the battleground, or they have that information, but they can't evaluate it properly. If Kiev doesn't want to discuss President Trump's propositions, if they refuse to do that, they and the European warmongers must realize that the events in Kupiansk will repeat inevitably in other key sections of the front line. Maybe not as quick as we would like it, but inevitably.
So that's what Putin said, mainly putting it on Europe and Ukraine to engage in talks and saying that it could provide a foundation, but not much else. So continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that before I went off on the discussions that I have had, that there wasn't something new and breaking that where Vladimir Putin went, these 28 points are the greatest thing since sliced bread, and Russia wholeheartedly supports them. Because what I've heard from the Russians is that, there's some things in here that just are non-starters from the Russian perspective. But the Russians aren't going to be the ones who shoot this thing down. They're going to let the Ukrainians and the Europeans do that, because then the Russians get a free ride, so to speak, because Ukraine will pay the price, Europe will be isolated, and Russia will have a green light to continue what have been extraordinarily successful military operations. The double envelopment of Kupiansk and Pokrovsk is over. I know, gosh, Scott, we read in the media that the Pokrovsk is holding. No, it isn't holding. It's surrounded. The units that could get out got out with 60% losses. The other units are trapped and they're going to die. That's just the way it is. There's going to be 5,000 to 7,000 Ukrainians either surrendering or dying in Pokrovsk, and a similar number surrendering or dying in Kupiansk. Total massacre. And this is going to happen over and over and over again. This is repeating itself throughout the throughout the front lines. So, that's the reality. And this is what Vladimir Putin was saying, is that we will just continue to win, and we won't stop winning ever. It may take longer to win in some areas than it does in others, but we will just keep winning until we get everything we want violently, if that's what you want. But there's, the other thing is, on this peace plan, there's at least, there's three major unresolved. I had a very fascinating discussion with a senior Ministry of Defense official. And, first of all, let's just, we go to the foundational components of Vladimir Putin's, plan for peace. He's outlined this in great detail in June of this year, when he said, it's basically the Istanbul communique of April 2022, updated to reflect the current reality. But he hasn't shifted at all. Demilitarization means just that. It doesn't mean Ukraine gets to keep the largest land army in Europe. I mean, this 28 point says Ukraine gets 600,000. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to read the comments, but Pookie, drop dead. You have no idea what you're talking about. Literally, you don't. You know, I mean, I just love it when people throw in their 10 cents from left field. The Ukraine will not be allowed to have a 600,000 man army. They may be allowed to have a 60,000 man army, which is about the size that the Russians had agreed to in the Istanbul communique. But 600,000 is ridiculous. That's the size of the Ukrainian armed forces at the start of this conflict. They're about 100,000 more, but specifically that's the size of the NATO-trained component that was getting ready to invade the Donbass, which of course is what triggered Russia's preemptive attack. Everybody forgets about this. So that's problematic. The demilitarization also means getting rid of all of the NATO equipment, all of it. There will be no NATO element in Ukraine. So Patriot missiles, all these new fancy European surface-to-air missiles, all the artillery pieces, all the tanks, everything, that's gone. Either it's turned over to Russia or it's evacuated, but it won't be allowed. The Ukrainian military will not have a Western component. There won't be any European flavor, no European aircraft, no nothing. All those F-16s that sent in, they're gone. If it says made in Europe, it's gone. That's what demilitarization means. When Russia says no NATO, it's not just not a NATO membership. There could be no quasi-NATO, involvement in Ukraine. So I don't know, who came up with the 600,000. I don't know if it's accurate because remember, this is a leaked document. So it could have been a doctored document as well. And the other thing that apparently is missing, we've got the 28 points, but there's actually an annex that comes with it that hasn't been leaked. And it's a very thick annex, which spells out a whole bunch of stuff. It gets into the details. The details aren't good for Ukraine, but that's what happens when you lose a war, Pookie. If Ukraine was winning a war, Pookie, I don't think Zelensky would be standing in front of the presidential administration building saying we are facing a very difficult situation. That's not what winners do, Pookie. Winners are like Vladimir Putin sitting there saying, screw it, we don't care, we'll just keep fighting, Pookie. I'm sorry, I'm in Russia and I just don't have patience for stupid people. There's a reason why I come to Russia. There's a reason why I pay the money that I paid to come to Russia and underwrite all of my expenses and undergo all the hard work to line up these interviews and stuff. And that's to gather the Russian reality, the truth. So Pookie, unless you're here with me doing a parallel collection process, pound sand. I don't have patience for this. This is too serious. This is life and death. This is because of what's going to happen now if Ukraine and the West, Europe undermines this peace potential, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are going to die, Pookie. Hundreds of thousands. Okay, that's on you. That's on stupid people like you who think Ukraine's winning and you continue to promulgate the concept of the possibility of Ukrainian victory. There is no possibility of a Ukrainian victory whatsoever. So 600,000 is the thing. The frozen line of contact. Somehow people, this comes out of Alaska, where this notion that Ukraine would immediately evacuate the Donbass and turn that over to Russia, but the line of contact will be frozen at in Zaporizhia and Kherson. And somehow these 28 points sound like that Ukraine is going to be able to keep the parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson that it currently occupies. This is incompatible with the Russian Constitution. And the last time I read the Russian Constitution, Vladimir Putin doesn't have the ability to give away Russian territory. And the Constitution has been written away that after the referendum, the totality of Kherson and Zaporizhia are part of Russia. And so this is another thing that's just incompatible. I haven't found a Russian yet who says, yeah, this is what could happen. They're all just like, no, it can't happen. It's Mother Russia. It's constitutional. And Vladimir Putin simply doesn't have the power to give away Russian territory, not without the consent of the Duma and a referendum with the Russian population, et cetera. So, that's another problematic thing. Ukraine's going to lose all of the territories. That's the reality. And the 28 points don't talk about a buffer zone. There will be a buffer zone. Apparently in the annex, it does spell out the detailed reality of not just Ukraine turning over the territories to Russia, but further evacuating, a strip of territory between, what will be left of Ukraine's military and the Russian military presence. And we're talking about maybe up to 100 kilometers deep. This buffer, because Ukraine was stupid enough to bring in ATACMS missiles and other missiles that gave them long-range strike capabilities. And Russia said that the buffer zone will prevent Ukraine from being able to carry out acts of terrorism against Russian population centers. That includes population centers in Donetsk and Lugansk and Kherson and Zaporozhye. So this is another problematic point. And then there's denazification. Nobody wants to talk about denazification. But let me just put it this way: if you literally embrace Stepan Bandera, you're dead. Let me just spell it out. You won't live. You're done. Leave. Run away. But you're not going to sit there and put up Bandera's portrait in your restaurant in Lvov and sing songs praising Bandera. It's over for the Banderists. That's why Russia fought this war. That's why, I'll probably be breaking some news now, but the Ukrainians, the Russian Ministry of Defense has basically said that Ukraine's lost over 1.5, I think it's 1.52 million soldiers. That's dead and wounded to the extent that they're not returning to the battlefield. And then there was a concession that Russia had suffered approximately 10% of those casualty rates. So, and then there was a concession that number might be modified upward just a little bit. 10% would be 152,000 irretrievable casualties. I believe that number will be modified up to around 198,000 irretrievable casualties. That's a lot. Vietnam, we lost 10,000 guys, and that broke our back. So Russia's probably lost 198,000 irretrievables. But there's some good news that's coming out. There's ways to look at things when you're trying to evaluate certain realities. One of the things that can be done is to research the number of prosthetics that are being ordered in Russia, because this war has, resulted in a large number of people losing their limbs. And in 2023, 2024, the numbers of prosthetics were quite high, 2023 especially. Today, the number is dropped off the map. There's hardly any prosthetics being ordered. Why? Because Russia's not losing that many men. Russia has created an algorithm. And I've made this point over and over again, but again, it's been reiterated to me by senior Russian military leaders and the tactical leaders, including Storm Z commanders, the actual assault forces. The day of you keep hearing about the Russians throwing, mass infantry, meat grinder assaults. That just isn't happening. What's happening is the Russians attack with, 3, 6, 9s, 3-man basic assault team, controlled by drones, literally drone overwatch with a drone fire support team. Their drone suppression. Drones are everywhere. And these 3 men are going in with a drone saying, stop. Okay, there's a Ukrainian over that hill. Throw a grenade over that hill. Okay, don't move now. The Ukrainians are moving. Now move. Shoot to the left. Get and these guys are being directed by the drone operators who are literally overwatching them, tracking where the Ukrainians are. And the other thing is when they stop, they have a drone support team right there that's popping in. The Russians are willing to expend 5 FPV drones per Ukrainian soldier. I mean, that's how many of these drones there are. And so, once the Russians, basically zoom in on a Ukrainian unit with their drones, all the Ukrainians will die. Literally, none of them will live. And the converse is true too. Every once in a while, the Russians get caught out. And when the Ukrainians get the Russians where, they don't have the ability to suppress the Ukrainian UAVs, it's a bad day for the Russians. That's why the Russians don't go in with mass wave assaults. They go in 3, 6s, 9s. And basically what will happen is if that unit, made a mistake, such as a Storm Z unit made a few days ago, they got caught and the Ukrainians waxed them. I mean, I have been in direct contact with the commander of the unit who was extraordinarily badly burned by Ukrainian phosphorus grenade, literally skin peeled off his body. And because of the drone reality, he had to walk 20 kilometers on his own to evacuate because you can't get anybody in to get him. They launched an assault, they got an exposed position, and they got screwed. The war went bad for them. Lost a bunch of guys, and the guys that were wounded had to get out themselves. This is the reality of war. This is the reality of war. It's not as though this is a totally one-way show for the Russians. The Ukrainians are fighting hard. The Russians give them full credit for that, full credit for fighting hard, but they're losing, and they're losing badly. I mean, the casualty ratios are unreal in certain parts of this war. But the fact of the matter is, Russia is prevailing on the battlefield. They're winning. Vladimir Putin's made this clear, and they're just not going to concede anything to the Ukrainians at this point in time. This will not be a negotiation. This is unconditional surrender.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I hear Putin say something like this will serve as a foundation, I look at a foundation. I'm not a homeowner, but I look at a foundation as being the beginning, being the kind of infrastructure for talks. And that's how Russia is talking about this. They're talking about continuing the Alaska process, which happened quite a while ago. There was this point, Scott, in the 28 points that were leaked about Russian frozen funds. I don't know if you saw that, where it says the U.S. is going to receive 50% of them, and that is going to be used for Ukrainian reconstruction. 100 billion of these frozen assets will be invested in U.S.-led efforts to rebuild and invest in Ukraine. What do you think of this? Because I've seen some people say that this is a plan where Ukraine has to capitulate to Russia, surrender, as you said. But it also seems like it's a plan that says, Russia, you need to almost surrender or capitulate in many ways to the United States. How do you react to this?
Well, we have to look at it in a broader perspective than just that. First of all, hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian national reserve have been stolen by the West. Don't say frozen, stolen. Russia doesn't have access to them. And on top of that, we have comprehensive sanctions in place against Russia. And again, I'm here in Russia. The economy is moving along. We're talking over 4% growth. The United States is at 1.6 or 1.8% growth. So Russia's growing bigger than the United States. There is inflation. The inflation is 18, 20%. That's what happens when you get an overheated economy. There's a cash shortage in Russia because they don't print money like the United States does. And so there's, there isn't cash available. So the sanctions have caused some problems for Russia. The Russians will be the first ones to admit it. They've had to make painful decisions, and they've had to make major readjustments and realignments of the direction their economy was leaning. It's not leaning towards the West anymore. It's leaning towards the global South and China. But it's surviving. It's even thriving in many ways. Imagine what this economy would do if all of the sanctions were lifted. I mean, we'd be talking, again, growth that would, probably get into double-digit growth for a little while. So that's not mentioned in this $100 billion frozen asset, game being played. So what we're basically saying is that Russia could do nothing and just play the hand it has and win, but it'll never get access to those hundreds of billions of dollars of assets, and sanctions will stay in place, which impose a cost that over the years could, likewise rise up into the hundreds of billions of dollars of costs. Or they can use Donald Trump's proclivity for business deals and come out absolute winners. Sacrificing $100 billion isn't really a sacrifice. The Russians, again, there's certain aspects of these things. There must be elections within 100 days is one of the things that they're talking about. You don't think the Russians are going to be, in there, working that, they have a game plan. So if Russia's trying to get a Ukraine that is going to lean towards Russia, try to be integrated into perhaps the Union state, that's a popular theory right now amongst many well-placed Russians, that the ultimate objective of how to deal with the Ukraine problem isn't to occupy Ukraine or allow Ukraine to escape to the West. It's to incorporate Ukraine into the Union state, just like Belarus was, a sovereign state, but with an economy and geopolitical vision and such closely linked to Russia. And that's the vision they have of Ukraine. So that'll be done. That's a political problem. There's the elections taking place. Russia has a whole bunch of candidates ready to come in. And so that money that's going to be invested in Ukraine isn't going to be invested in a pro-NATO, EU-leaning Ukraine. It'll be invested in rebuilding a Ukraine that Russia wants to incorporate into the Union state. So from the Russian perspective, this was money they were going to spend anyways. So giving Donald Trump credit for, creating this fund, whoop-de-doo. This doesn't cost Russia anything. Russia wins across the board in this deal. It's just the fact that, and the other thing is Europe has to pony up money as well. It's not like Russia's doing this alone. They'll take $100 billion from the frozen assets, but Europe has to pony up $100 billion as well. And Europe doesn't have $100 billion to pony up. So at least we know where the Russian money's coming from. This is just a good deal for Russia all around.
Yeah. Well, those are good points, because as you said earlier, when it comes to denazification, demilitarization, I think this element of the political system, the government, that also is going to have to change in Ukraine in order for those things to truly be meted out. Or Russia, we're talking about Russian occupation, which Russia doesn't want to do. And they've made that very clear. They want this to be a Ukrainian project that leads to very good things like Belarus. I know you were just in Belarus too. And I saw some of Garland's footage, our friend Garland Nixon. I mean, it looked great. It looked like great. I know that, poverty there is pretty tiny. I know they've done a lot of great things. So that's a really
but just so people understand, Belarus was about 98% destroyed during the Second World War. The Nazis had a plan called Plan Ost, Plan East, that basically the goal was to depopulate entire areas in Belarus, in eastern Poland, and in parts of Russia, depopulate them and turn it into a giant summer camp for Russian soldiers and their families, where they could come and get a dacha and have land and just Lebensraum and the whole thing. Plan Ost didn't get fully implemented because the war didn't go exactly the way Hitler wanted it to. But part of the plan, when we speak of depopulation, the Germans would just simply come into villages, surround them, take the population, put them in a barn, set the barn on fire, and burn everybody to death. That was it. Everything was destroyed in Belarus. Everything. They lost 1 out of every 3 people. It's literal genocide of the Belarusian people. Now, understand that 800,000 of the more than 3.1 million people killed were Jews, and another large proportion of that were, soldiers. But still, the systemic murder of Belarusian civilians, was something that people just tend to turn a blind eye to. It was real. It was devastating. But the point I'm trying to make is that, it took a long time for Belarus to recover. And it wasn't until the 1960s and 70s that they actually were able to clear away all of the rubble and begin this, the systemic reconstruction of cities. Minsk was built from the ground up in grand Soviet realistic style. I mean, we are talking about broad boulevards. We're talking about, big white buildings there. And it's been maintained that way. Minsk is a Soviet city in every way. And it's pretty cool. It's clean. The people are well educated. They are friendly. They are hardworking. And it was just a remarkable place to go. So when people, I hear people, Scott, when you talk about the Union State, you're really just talking about Russian colonialism. The Russians exploiting the poor Belarusian people. Again, you don't know what you're talking about. You simply don't know. I don't know where people get their information. Go to Belarus. See Belarus. It is a remarkable country. Donald Trump was talking about potentially opening up direct air flights between the United States and Belarus. Do that. And here's the other big secret, guys. You ready for this one? If you get a visa to Belarus and you fly to Belarus, you can travel to Russia visa-free. All you have to do is get on an airplane, fly to Russia. You'll go through passport control. And because you have a Belarusian visa, Russia, by treaty, there's a new law that was signed by Vladimir Putin, they have to let you in. So you get to go to Russia too, and get to see Russia. And you'll find out that Russia's a pretty cool place too. But you'll also see, the reason why I encourage you to do that if you're going to Belarus is to see that they're two totally different countries. Two totally different countries. Totally different mindsets. The Belarusian mindset is not the Russian mindset. And as much as the Belarusians love the Russians, and they do, they sometimes resent them because the Russians to the Belarusians are a little too, full of themselves and a little too, we're Russia kind of stuff. And the Belarusians, they learned their lesson from World War II. They're very humble. They understand, the tragedy that befell them, and they understand that war cannot be fought. If the Belarusian approach is to avoid conflict at all costs. So the idea that by absorbing Ukraine into the Union State, making it the third sister, that this somehow means that Ukraine is finished as a sovereign state. Go to Belarus and you'll see the answer. Belarus is a sovereign state with a unique national identity, and they're thriving because they now have open, good relations with the Russians. So that helps them economically. It provides them with security, so they don't have the Baltic states and the Poles trying to undermine them with George Soros funded color revolutions. But they are a sovereign state with their own independent foreign policy, their independent approach to problem solving, and Ukraine could do far worse than becoming part of the Union State.
Yeah. I mean, just only take a look at Ukraine's economy now and the state of Ukraine in general to get a picture of that. Scott, I wanted to get your reaction to Ukraine's response to the 28-point peace plan and Europe's. So we have Ukraine saying, Volodymyr Zelensky saying, this is going to be one of the most difficult moments in our history. Ukraine faces a very tough choice, either lose our dignity or risk the loss of a key partner. Didn't say who that was, but we guess Donald Trump. Either the difficult 28 points or an extremely harsh winter, the hardest one yet. And then, of course, Europe has also said opposed this plan for many different reasons, the biggest one being NATO security guarantees not on it. And they've said, that they will protect, of course, Ukraine and Europe's interests for kingdom come until time immemorial. But Scott, what's your reaction to the response? It seems like they're melting down. They're very concerned. Why are they so concerned? And why is especially Zelensky talking about this harshest winter yet? Those are pretty ominous words.
Well, there's the old saying, fool around and find out. Ukraine fooled around and they're finding out. The Ukrainian army is being slaughtered systemically right now on the battlefield. Again, I saw a comment said online and said, guys, just shut up. If you're going to accuse me of something, do your homework. I've been consistent as the day is long. Ukraine's losing this war. They're losing men by the bushel full. And that's just the reality of it. And the casualty figures today, even though overall the casualty rates is around 10-1, today the ratio is much higher because the Russians are dominating the battlefield in every way possible. And that's just the reality. Ukraine's about to lose some of their best brigades: the 25th Brigade, the 38th Marine Brigade, I think the 92nd Air Assault Brigade. These are all NATO-trained formations that are now permanently stuck, and they're all going to die. And when they die, they don't just, it's not just the equipment, but it's the trained manpower. And there is no replacement. The replacements are guys who are getting bonked on the head and dragged off to, perfunctory military training and then thrown to the front line and dying. So this is the reality that Zelensky's facing. The other reality is, the Ukrainians tried to take on, the Russian oil industry and try to harm this. Again, it's a British plan that was, very well researched. I mean, the British found, identified all the nodes where all the energy nodes are, and then, facilitated the Ukrainians with intelligence. And Ukrainians launched drones that were specifically designed to defeat Russian air defense, wooden drones, slow flying. The radar signature replicates that of a flock of birds. This is the time of year when flocks of birds are flying all over the place. And then these drones would hit the Russian, oil refinery, oil distribution, etc. Well, I just, again, had a fascinating conversation with the guy who is on the committee that marries the Ministry of Defense with the Russian energy, with the oil producing and gas producing energy team on how to defend against this, basically the counter drone program and how to protect its facilities. And he said, yes, we got hit. We got hit. He said none of it was permanent. I mean, Russia is, after all, a giant gas station with nuclear weapons, if you listen to certain people, but they have a lot of spare parts. And when these refineries are hit, the Russians are able to isolate the damage and then rapidly repair it and get the refinery back up and running. And so, there is no permanent, long-standing damage to the Russian economy, unlike everything that they are saying on Twitter and everything else. There's some temporary shortages in certain areas of the country, driven by, the impact of this, but the diversion of resources, redistribution, and boom, there's no car lines, none whatsoever. And the price of gas has not gone up that much. It's gone up a little bit, but not that much. There's diesel. So all this fiction you hear on Twitter and everything else just is absolute BS. What isn't BS is that the Russians have now destroyed every single major electricity producing facility in Ukraine. None are up. They're all gone. They're finished. And Russia will continue to pound them. Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to repair them. Europe right now is panicked, trying to come in and find ways to divert electricity into Ukraine, or to help them repair things or come up with generator capacity. But that's it. It's over for Ukraine. And this is the reality. If this winter gets cold, and it's cold, I mean, it's not the worst. The temperatures right now are hovering right around zero. Moscow had its first snow, and then the snow melted. I think there's some patches on the ground right now. St. Petersburg had a significant snowfall. But Ukraine, it's going to get cold. It always gets cold. And come a month from now, going into February, early March, Ukraine's going to be a popsicle with no electricity, no gas to warm it up. This is going to lead to societal collapse. And this is what Zelensky understands. And then we throw on top of that the corruption scandal. We always knew that Ukraine was fundamentally corrupt, no matter how much the Democrats tried to deny it or paper it over. There was a time, Seymour Hersh reported on this, where the director of the CIA, William Burns, had to fly to Ukraine and confront Zelensky directly. And it wasn't that, oh, you're being corrupt. It was, look, we understand you had, because, I mean, in defense of Zelensky, the reality of the Ukrainian system of government is that you have to buy people off. Gosh, look at the United States Senate. Who was it? Senator Johnson or somebody was when asked if you're going to ban insider trading, he said no. If you ban insider trading, then who's going to run for Senate? What's the incentive? And he said it out loud. It basically, no, you got to have to give us the right to get rich. We have to be able to get rich in here, or else there's no reason for us to come to the Senate. All right. Well, so America is one of the most fundamentally corrupt democracies in the world, because that's the reality. When you become a representative or a senator, you get rich because you get insider trading. The system is geared to enable that to happen. Ukraine is geared in a similar fashion. Money that gets allocated gets into the pockets of these people. And that's just the way it goes. And when more money comes in, to sustain a wartime system of governance, Zelensky has to allow people to get rich. That's why they support him. They don't support him because they love him. They don't support him because he's the greatest, democratic representative the world has ever seen. They love him because he facilitates corruption that makes everybody rich. And so the United States allows this to happen. But Zelensky was taking so much money that William Burns actually had to come in and say, you can't take that much. We'll let you take, I think that amount was 400 million. But we're going to cap it at 400 million, and you just can't take any more than that. I just want to remind all the Americans in there that that's 400 million of U.S. taxpayer money. Okay. And for all you Europeans out there, that's your money as well. And so now we have this scandal that's been exploded. There's some reason to believe that the United States may have been behind the leaking of this document specifically to undermine Zelensky and put him in a very difficult situation. But the fact is Zelensky's been called out as a corrupt individual. He has no legitimacy, no mandate. The only thing that allows him to govern is the corruption. And so Zelensky's facing a very, very hard winter. He may not survive this winter. Understand that when you're that corrupt, you just don't get to walk away from what you've done, especially when you have the 1.52 million Ukrainian souls, haunting you in everything you've done. When Europe basically has predicated its ability to grow economically and politically on the sustainment of the Ukraine conflict. If Ukraine collapses, see, this 28-point peace plan isn't about just Ukraine collapsing. It's the end of Europe. It's literally the end of Europe. Europe will not survive this. European political and economic elites, because they are thoroughly linked to Ukraine and the future of Ukraine. So, those Europeans aren't going to be happy about Zelensky as well. I just don't see Zelensky sailing off to a nice peaceful retirement. I think he gets the Diem treatment, and anybody who wants to know what that is, go back and study Vietnam and what the CIA did to President Diem when he became inconvenient to the United States.
Yeah, great point, Scott. And I wanted your comment on, there was some rumors flying around about this 28-point peace plan being leaked. You said maybe to put Zelensky in a difficult position. And right after that, the United States Trump administration said Zelensky has a timeline to accept this or lose weapons, lose intel sharing. And but we've also seen Keith Kellogg. He is now on the outs. He is leaving after his term as U.S. envoy to Ukraine ends, his one-year term. So is there a connection to this, Scott? This 28-point peace plan coming out and Keith Kellogg's ouster?
Yeah, I believe there is. Again, this is just informed speculation. I don't have anybody call me on the phone saying this is what's happening. But Keith Kellogg has been the whisperer, the Ukraine whisperer in Trump's ear. And he's the big guy that's been giving Trump all the bad information about Ukraine. And for a while, Trump literally bought into it. Alaska was a wake-up call to Donald Trump, because Alaska, the Russians put the marker down on what the limits are, what their expectations are, what reality is. And Trump was compelled to accept this because he had no other choice. Kellogg then came back afterwards and helped facilitate the group of seven that came marching into the White House to confront Donald Trump, and all this stuff. Kellogg was behind that, and for a while it looked like Kellogg was on the rise because Trump started talking about tomahawks and started talking about all this sort of stuff, and then Marco Rubio had a phone call with Sergei Lavrov, and it was a very difficult phone call for Marco Rubio because Lavrov went undiplomatic and just straight up said to the equivalent of, you guys have to stop listening to Keith Kellogg and all the other stupid people because you're just dead wrong. We're not playing this game. You know what our conditions are. We're not changing. We don't care about you. We can live without you. I was told this over and over and over again. Russia can unplug from the United States. Russia can unplug from Europe and survive. They won't thrive, but they can survive. And Russia's ready to do this. And Lavrov basically told Rubio to pound sand, that you're not going to get anything that you want. And that went back to Trump. And I think that's when Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev flew here to the United States. Went down to Miami, and everybody's probably asking, like I did, why is he going to Miami? What's in Miami? Well, now we know. Steve Witkoff was in Miami. Witkoff, has a residence in Florida, and Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev started crafting this 28-point peace plan because it's premised on Russian reality. There's still some issues there. It's politics. Trump's not going to give away the farm up front, but this document, together with the annex that hasn't been released yet, largely reflects the Russian position. There's certain things we already talked about: 600,000 men, frozen line of contact, et cetera, that aren't going to survive. I don't see Russia conceding on these things, but Kellogg is finished because now he's been exposed as a liar, or thoroughly stupid and incompetent, or both. But the president doesn't trust Keith Kellogg anymore, and so now Kellogg is done, finished, and there's some belief that he leaked a version of the 28 points to the press through Axios in order to undermine the plan, to give the Ukrainians and the Europeans a chance to say no and to oppose Trump, etc. And if he did that, then he's a frickin' traitor, the kind of traitor that should be put up against the wall and shot. This is a guy, remember, Keith Kellogg is a guy that, just last month marched up to Zelensky and got one of the highest awards the Ukrainians could give to an American special envoy who's supposed to work for the President of the United States, but apparently has been working for the Ukrainians all along.
Yeah. Yeah, good point, Scott. And are we entering a kind of game again? I feel like the last time we were in serious U.S.-Russia talks, we had Europe do what it's doing now, which is saying, they're meeting with Zelensky on this emergency basis. Merz, Macron, Starmer, they're all saying, well, no, we're getting troops ready. We're getting more assistance ready for Ukraine to undermine this. What do you make of this? It just feels like there is this cycle that repeats, and then after your reaction, I'll play how Putin responds. He's almost foreshadowing this as well. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think this is why this 28-point peace plan was leaked. So, Kellogg can indirectly get one last charge out of the Europeans. Let's just make it as clear as possible. There will be no European troops deployed to Ukraine for several reasons. One, they don't have any to deploy. I just keep wondering where they're going to come from. France did a major logistical exercise 2 years ago. The maximum number of troops that the French were able to mobilize and project outside of France was 12,500. If you think 12,500 troops is going to tip the scales of the battlefield, and you don't know what you're talking about. The British simply don't have an army. They don't. They don't have any artillery. They gave away all of their self-propelled artillery. Great Britain has no more self-propelled artillery. It's all been gone to Ukrainians, and they're all getting destroyed. You could put the entire British Army into a major soccer stadium in Europe and have 30,000 unsold seats. So the Brits have no ability whatsoever to project power. Germany, the Germans, there was a poll in Germany earlier this year that said if Germany was invaded, only 16% of the male population would be willing to fight and die for Germany, to repulse the invasion. 16%. Now imagine what that number is going to look like if Germany's trying to project power into Ukraine. There's just no support. And the German military is a fundamentally broken military. I mean, you can have all these Fourth Reich Nazis like Merz and company out there talking about we're going to build the largest military. It's just bull. Build it with what? German defense, Rheinmetall lost 20% of its stock value in the last couple months. There's no steel production capacity anymore. There's just nothing. Germany can do nothing. They can't project power. Poland, they run out of artillery ammunition in 14 days. So there's no European army being projected in Ukraine at all. There could be a force of several thousand. That's all the forces combined together that could go in as peacekeepers if there was a ceasefire and the Russians agreed to it. But those peacekeepers wouldn't be deployed unless the United States backed them up, and the United States isn't willing to do this right now. So Europe on its own will not be deployed troops to Ukraine. Straight up, simple statement of fact. So the Europeans have nothing. They can't threaten Donald Trump with anything because Trump will just call their bluff. We're going to do this. Do it. Do it. I mean, that's all Trump has to do. It. Shut up and do it. Quit telling me what you're going to do and do it. Well, we can't do it. Then shut up. Because if you're going to say you can't do it without American backing, we're not going to back you. So pound sand. Oh, yeah, Germany. You got the lead on NATO right now. We're done. What? You can't leave. You have all the communication support and the logistics planning, and we've got no capacity to do anything. We have no air power. Our Air Force has not been properly maintained for decades. We can barely get 5 airplanes off the ground at any one time. Don't go away, America. I mean, Trump holds all the cards, literally. NATO is nothing, dysfunctional. It's just a huge waste of money. So I don't think the Europeans are going to get very far this time. There isn't Keith Kellogg backing him up with his lies. Marco Rubio's just basically washed his hands of Ukraine. He is singularly focused on Venezuela right now. And so, the Europeans are going to get nowhere with this. It's over for Ukraine. Zelensky is right. He's facing an extraordinarily difficult choice.
Yeah, and here I'll have you react quickly to what Vladimir Putin had to say, almost foreshadowing a lot of what you're outlining here. Here he is.
But this text wasn't discussed with us in detail, and I can surmise why. I guess the reason is the same. The US administration still hasn't been able to secure the approval of Ukraine. Ukraine opposes to that. Obviously, Ukraine and its European allies still harbor illusions and still dream of delivering a strategic defeat to Russia. I think this position is not due to low levels of competence. I won't discuss this side of the matters now, but I think this position is due to lack of objective information on the real situation on the ground, on the battlefield. And obviously, neither Ukraine nor Europe realizes what this ultimately may lead to.
Very diplomatic of Vladimir Putin. Help us interpret that, Scott.
Well, basically what he said is that the peace plan that's been leaked was not coordinated with the Russian government. meaning that it didn't go through Russian staffing. It didn't come out from the foreign ministry. Kirill Dmitriev has been given a mandate to further the Alaska process, but he's not a replacement for the foreign ministry. And so I think what he was working out with Steve Witkoff was a plan of the possible, not the plan, but the plan of the possible. And that by leaking it, they, whoever leaked it, Keith Kellogg, got ahead of the staffing process. Putin was basically saying that this was done because, Trump isn't in control of the, of the Ukrainians. He's not in control of Europe. He's not in control of his own staff. I mean, Keith Kellogg leaked this document. He should be arrested, charged with treason, literally, because that's what he did, undermining the sitting president on a matter of national security. But basically, Putin is saying that if the Europeans and the Ukrainians believe they're going to be able to get something out of this process, other than what Russia is willing to give them, it's fuel. Russia is going to continue to wage this war. Russia has the strategic momentum across the entire line of contact. Russia is dominating the air war. Russia has effectively ended the energy war. There was this tit for tat energy thing going on. Ukraine's energy is 100% suppressed, and it will get even worse as the Russians continue to strike. And Russia has adapted to Ukraine's tactics. I'm here in Moscow. I went to dinner the other night in Moscow City, which is a new high-rise part of Moscow, very modern. And I ate at one of these restaurants. It's up like on the 89th floor of the tallest building, and you get the full panoramic view. These buildings were struck twice during the early phases of the Ukraine, attacks on Moscow. The Ukrainian drones. I mean, I asked the guys I was with, I'm like, aren't you worried about Ukrainian drones? And ain't no drone going to hit this building. Ain't no drone going to hit the center of Moscow. We got them like this. The Russians have secured Moscow. Some drones get into the suburbs and stuff, but it's the drone war is over. The war of the cities is finished. Ukraine lost, and if they want to continue to play stupid games, the Russians have the ability to continue to escalate. I mean, I'm just finishing up a paper right now on the Oreshnik and what that means to have an intermediate range missile, a strategic capacity, to have been used in combat for the first time in history. It represents an escalatory capability that Russia still has in its pocket. Russia hasn't reached the point where, if we do anything further, we have to use nuclear weapons. Now Russia has the ability to ratchet it up strategically without nuclear weapons. And, if this is just another capability that Russia has that the West doesn't. And the Russians have developed, new systems. Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, hinted at that. I think one of them is the Iskander-S, which basically is the Iskander missile that's been given now intermediate range capability that extended the range of the Iskander, so it can strike deep into Europe. And they may have done the same thing with the 9M 729 missile. This was a controversial system that the United States accused Russia of cheating with back in 2019. This is why the United States withdrew from the INF treaty. At that time, the Russians said they weren't cheating, and I believe them. But now that the INF treaty is no more because the United States withdrew from it, I believe that the Russians have gone back to that system and made certain modifications, and that system now has INF range, 1,200 kilometers, perhaps even more. And the Russians are again using, according to some reports, Russia has used this missile a number of times, against Ukraine, but they, launching it at longer ranges just to prove a point that they can strike Ukraine from 1,200 kilometers out. Imagine what they could do if they move that closer, how deep they could go into Europe. So Russia has this ability to escalate the fight right now that Europe simply doesn't possess, and Ukraine doesn't possess.
Just two, hopefully they're quick questions for you, Scott, before we close here. The first being, since you're in Russia, maybe you can tell us, I know that you've gone several times now, but I'm sure you learn something new every trip, something important. What would you like to impart about your trip thus far that has been new in terms of what you've learned and how it's relevant maybe to this moment that we find ourselves in?
The Russian people from top to bottom are tired of this war. That's a reality. There's pain in the eyes of everybody when I talk to them about this war. This war has impacted Russian society significantly. People have loved ones that are fighting. I just had lunch with a man whose son, out of patriotic duty, he wasn't, drafted. He basically told his father, I can't go on with my life right now if I don't serve my country in a time of war. And he went out and he signed a contract, and it's a contract for the duration, meaning you're not signing a like in the U.S. you do a 2-year enlistment, a 4-year enlistment, a 6-year enlistment. These are duration contracts. You're signing for the duration of the conflict. That is, you are going to fight until you either die or there's victory. And the combination of pride and sorrow in this man's eyes was real. But that's the point. They're tired of this war, but they're also determined that there will be no peace without victory. And that's the toast that's always out there. Peace, but first victory. And the Russians are thoroughly behind their leadership in this fight. You can listen to Gilbert Doctorow all you want. He has no frickin' clue what he's talking about when it comes to the reality of the Russian social elite and how they, according to him, they're ready to throw Putin out in the streets and all that. No, they're not. The opposition parties, and I've spoken with them, they say, look, in the last election for president, we didn't run anybody against Putin, not because we're not a opposition party, but because we love Russia. And Vladimir Putin is the leader right now, and we are behind our leader. We will run people for parliament because we want to have our point of view represented, and we want to be able to put pressure on Vladimir Putin. But we're not here to undermine the president in a time of war. And this is the reality. The Russian people are thoroughly behind this man and thoroughly behind the concept of winning this war. And, the other thing is Russia is winning decisively. And people need to understand that this isn't just about what's happening on the battlefield. This has been a broad spectrum attack on Russia through economic sanctions, unprecedented in history, the seizure of assets. Russia faces Russophobia in the United States and Europe. This is, again, a broad spectrum attack on Russia. And yet, despite everything, Russia's winning, not just a little bit. Russia's winning decisively. And this is the reality.
Well, Scott, last question quickly. I know because it's laid out there for you. Some viewers want to know your assessment of now the current situation regarding Venezuela. There's been reports now of the F-18 Super Hornet and other aircraft flying close to Venezuela from the Gerald Ford destroyer. Talk about what your assessment of the situation is now and where it fits in, given that the United States has explicitly said that it is trying to move away from this theater that we've been talking about, Ukraine, onto the Western Hemisphere, and has made Venezuela quite the focus, despite now Trump saying that maybe he's going to talk to Maduro. But we all know, or maybe we should know, that isn't necessarily a good thing always. Your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, ask the Iranians what it's like to negotiate with the United States. Let me put it this way. Go look at a map of Venezuela, the size of the country. overlay the map of Venezuela to scale over Iraq. And you'll see that Venezuela is bigger than Iraq. In 1991, Operation Desert Storm, to fight the Iraqis, the strategic air campaign, we had to deploy thousands of aircraft into the theater for a sustained strategic air campaign. So anytime you hear that, 8 F-18s flew along, to understand that that's nothing. We've got 10 F-35s. That's nothing. That's not a strategic air campaign. To launch a strategic air campaign against Venezuela is going to require tens of thousands of aircraft that are forward deployed, ready to rock. Not 2 B-52s, not one B-1 bomber. We're talking about tens of thousands of aircraft to do a strategic air campaign. We in 750,000 troops in 1991 to liberate Kuwait. We went into Iraq, but only after a decade of sanctions that tore down Iraqi's capabilities in 2003 with somewhat around 200,000 troops. We don't have anything close to those numbers deployed outside of Venezuela. So we're not talking about a major military action or a major military invasion. Anything we could be talking about would be a very tailored operation in support of a larger, covert operation, a regime change operation, that where the CIA would be, working with opposition groups to turn, Venezuelan military units, etc. And I just don't see that having matured to the point where it's even a possibility. If you go back to 1998, December of 1998, Operation Desert Fox, we tried to do the same thing against Saddam Hussein. We carried out a 72-hour bombing campaign that basically suppressed his Special Republican Guard and Iraqi institutions of repression. And the CIA had thought that they had recruited the generals of a couple divisions that were operating in the south of Baghdad, and that these divisions would then leave their barracks and move towards Baghdad with Saddam's security forces suppressed and achieve a coup d'etat. That's what we were trying to do. That didn't work. Now, why am I bringing up Iraq? Because the United States uses the same freaking plan over and over and over again. We really do. That's what we do. That same plan today, the United States is trying to implement in Venezuela, in my opinion. They're trying to identify Venezuelan military officers who are going to be willing to, at the right time, jump ship and move against Maduro. And in order to facilitate that, we would launch an air campaign, but not a strategic air campaign, a very focused air campaign to suppress the security infrastructure around Maduro. That's the plan, but I don't think it's ready to be implemented. I think Donald Trump understands that if he does that plan and it fails, he will not do well in the midterm elections. And so that's why you now suddenly have Donald Trump talking about the need for negotiation with Maduro. The hope is that these military forces are putting sufficient pressure on Maduro that he will leave the country. That's what the CIA is also trying to facilitate right now. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're trying to put pressure on him, but I don't see the United States, carrying out a major military operation against Venezuela before the midterms, because if they fail, that's the death sentence for Trump.
Yeah, great point, Scott. Everybody, make sure to, as we end here, hit the like button.
I don't know why I did that. I'm back now. Hold on.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has finally commented on Donald Trump's so-called new peace plan. In particular, speaking with permanent members of the Russian Security Council, Putin said that Trump's peace plan is not something new or secret. According to him, he had already discussed the US president's peace proposal at length during their bilateral meeting in Alaska. According to Putin, back then, the Americans asked Russia to show flexibility regarding the Ukrainian issue. After the Alaska summit, we agreed to hold peace talks with Ukraine. However, the Kyiv regime and its European allies disrupted the negotiation process and refused to discuss the terms of the proposed settlement, Vladimir Putin said. According to the Russian president, the Kyiv regime and European leaders constantly disrupt the negotiation processes and refuse to compromise, still hoping to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Furthermore, Vladimir Putin stressed that despite the fact that Russia is always ready for peace talks, Moscow is also completely satisfied with the current situation, as the Russian army fully owns the initiative on the battlefield, continuing to advance in all strategically important directions of the front. Thus, Vladimir Putin made it clear that Russia absolutely does not give a damn whether the Kyiv regime and European leaders agree to accept Trump's peace plan or not. Indeed, everything that happens on the battlefield indicates that time is on Russia's side. Almost every day, war correspondents report on the Russian army's new territorial gains. And the more the Kyiv regime delays the signing of the peace treaty, the more territories Ukraine will lose. Unfortunately for the Ukrainian people, everything that is happening indicates that this conflict will continue for a long time yet, and that Russia will still have to deprive Ukraine of its statehood and sovereignty. The fact is that on the morning of November 22, Bloomberg made a rather alarming statement. In particular, citing its own sources in Kyiv and Brussels, Bloomberg confirmed that Zelensky and European leaders have begun to make adjustments to Trump's peace plan, almost completely rewriting the terms of the peace agreement. And given the fact that Russia considers Kyiv and Europe to be the losing side, Moscow will never allow these losers to amend the peace treaty. Thus, it becomes clear that the fighting will continue, and will end only when the Russian army achieves all the objectives of the special military operation. Meanwhile, war correspondents continue to record the Russian army's new successes in all strategically important directions of the front. In particular, on the morning of November 22, Russian troops established full control over the settlement of Zvinovka, south of Siversk. The loss of Zvinovka by the Ukrainian army became a disaster for the Kyiv regime. The fact is that the last supply route of the Ukrainian group in Siversk passes near this settlement. 5 days earlier, the Russian army had cut another supply route, after the liberation of Platonovka. Thus, the Ukrainian group located in Siversk found itself in a real operational encirclement. Against this backdrop, many experts and war correspondents declared that Siversk could fall in the first days of December. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has also achieved significant successes in the Zaporizhia region. In particular, the Russian soldiers of the 37th Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 36th Army completely liberated the settlement of Novoye Zaporizhia. It is worth noting that numerous Ukrainian military telegram channels also confirm this information. According to them, Russian army units continue to break into Ukrainian defenses in the Zaporizhia region and take control of vast territories along the right bank of the Gaichur River. Commenting on the current situation on the battlefield, the commander of Spetsnaz Akhmat, General Apty Oladanov, declared that the Ukrainian defense is bursting at the seams, and that the Russian army would soon enter the operational space, and be able to move forward in the central, southern, and northern parts of Ukraine, without receiving serious resistance. General Apty Oladanov also noted that over the past 3 months, the quality of training of so-called foreign mercenaries has decreased significantly. According to him, against the backdrop of the Ukrainian army's retreat, many active-duty NATO soldiers and officers began to flee Ukraine. At the same time, he noted that the NATO command continues to utilize its officers in Ukraine to operate complex weapons systems, including HIMARS, M270 MLRS, Patriot, Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and MGM-140 ATACMS ballistic missiles. By the way, sources in the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that 4 American ATACMS ballistic missiles that were shot down over the Russian city of Voronezh were launched by 2 M270 MLRS missile systems, operated by active-duty U.S. Army officers. At the same time, it should be noted that even though Russian air defense systems destroyed all enemy missiles, their debris damaged the buildings of the Voronezh Regional Gerontological Center and Children's Home, as well as several private houses. Fortunately, there were no casualties. Furthermore, immediately after that, Russia managed to discover the exact launch site of the American ballistic missiles. Russia even showed a video of the destruction of American missile systems in the area of the settlement of Volskaya Balaklia, in the Kharkiv region. In total, as a result of this Russian missile attack, 2 units of M270 MLRS and 1 escort vehicle were destroyed. In addition, the Russian Defense Ministry also confirmed the deaths of 4 U.S. Army officers and 6 Ukrainian soldiers of the Elite Special Forces Unit Corps, who were guarding expensive American missile systems.
Russia has issued a stern warning to Ukrainian President Zelensky: negotiate now or risk further territorial losses. Dmitry Peskov stressed that every day of delay strengthens Moscow's position, leaving Kyiv with shrinking options. The message is clear: battlefield realities, not Western speeches, will shape Ukraine's fate. Peskov highlighted that Russia's advance is irreversible. Each hour Kyiv hesitates, the Ukrainian map shifts further in Moscow's favor. Russian forces continue their methodical push across Kharkiv and northeastern fronts, showing Ukrainian resistance is increasingly futile. Putin confirmed receiving the US-Russian modernized 28-point peace plan. He warned that Kyiv's rejection demonstrates a misunderstanding of the battlefield reality. Russia is ready for substantive discussions, but delay only strengthens Moscow's hand.
We have received the modernized 28-point peace plan. Ukraine refuses to discuss it and remains under illusions about reversing Russian gains. Moscow is ready for peace talks, but only if Kyiv engages seriously.
Russia highlights Kupiansk as evidence of unstoppable advance. By early November, the city was almost fully under Russian control, despite Kiev claims, showing Ukraine's inability to assess or act decisively on the front line. Moscow argues that Kiev and European allies misjudge the battlefield, believing they can halt Russian advances. Russian operations outpace Western forecasts and weaken Ukrainian morale. Russian territorial advances squeeze Kiev. Politically and militarily, the Kremlin's message is clear: negotiate on Moscow's terms or face continued losses. Momentum is firmly on Russia's side. Putin reiterated Russia's willingness for peace, emphasizing that substantive discussion of the modernized plan is required. Kiev's refusal to engage will not stop Russian progress, but serious dialogue remains possible.
The SMO objectives will continue by armed means, but Russia is ready to resolve issues peacefully if Kiev discusses the details of the plan seriously.
Coffee. Follow me.